Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new, welcome as well. I talk mostly about astrology on this channel so far, specifically locational astrology. For those of you who are tuning in again, I will from now on be referring to it as locational astrology as opposed to astrogeography. I just personally prefer the terminology. Anyways, in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the astro-locational Pluto line. And I think I've mentioned in some of my other videos that I actually grew up pretty close to my descending Pluto line in Toronto, Canada. So I spent the better of probably 26 or 27 years on that line. So well, close to it, but it's an intense energy. So anyways, I know it quite well. And I also have visited that line and directly crossed it twice, the descending Pluto line, in New Orleans, Louisiana, or very close to there at least. It might have been more of like just a little bit outside of there, but I've definitely directly crossed it in Alabama. And I've also visited my Pluto IC line as well, pretty close to it in Barcelona, Spain. So I think I can talk about the Pluto line. Either way, I hope you guys enjoy the video. Let's get started. Pluto lines are fascinating, dark, and sexy, and full of temptation, but there's also something about them that makes you feel uneasy, something that you can't quite put your finger on. I find that with all of the places I've been to so far on Pluto lines, there's kind of this city that never sleeps kind of vibe. Like everything comes alive in the nighttime. There's something magnetic about a Pluto line. But I think it would be really intense to live on long term, and I can say it's pretty intense just living close enough to one of my Pluto lines. It is a lot. So Pluto tends to be one of everybody's favorite planets when it comes to astrology. It is deep and intense. It is ruled by Scorpio, or it rules Scorpio, as well as the 8th house in astrology. So some things that you can expect when either visiting or moving to your Pluto line or nearby it. Expect deep psychological insights, intense transformation, like the shedding of an old skin, death and rebirth, brushes with death, near-death experiences, learning to let go, like shedding an old skin, kind of the phoenix rising out of the ashes type of scenario going on. It will force you to get to the root of deeper seated issues in your life, such as patterns, escapism, addictive behavior. You might also experience isolation and a lot of emotional pain on one of these lines. It kind of forces you to connect with the self deeply or connect with others quite deeply on a profound level. You could expect issues around power play or questioning the true meaning of power, as well as intense people and surroundings and experiences depending on which specific Pluto line you're on. Expect to find things that are related to the occult, astrology, tarot, voodoo, or any kind of energy manipulation or healing. Pluto also rules over our ancestors or any kind of ancestral ties, as well as mysteries and things being more than what they appear, things that need to be uncovered below the surface of what they appear to be on the outside, things that are super deep. There's a real darkness to Pluto as well. It rules over things like war and destruction and contamination and poison and pollution. Expect feelings of fear, anxiety, isolation, feeling small, poverty, victimhood, feeling burnt out and exhausted on a Pluto line as well. Expect to find garbage, smelly, rotting things as well on a Pluto line, since Pluto rules elimination, death, and rebirth and regeneration. Expect to find a lot of creative and deep and intense soulful people on Pluto lines, such as actors and musicians and different types of artists, as well as bartenders, because addictive behavior and addictive substances are also ruled by Pluto as well. So as far as health-related things that you might experience on a Pluto line, expect psychological issues, whether that be something like depression, anxiety, or something more extreme like bipolar or schizophrenia to be more intense on a Pluto line or perhaps manifest there. Also expect issues with the kidneys, colon, or reproductive system, since Pluto rules those areas of the body, as well as the lymphatic system as well, since Pluto rules basically the elimination system. It's the part of the body that gets rid of the garbage. It gets rid of the toxic things. Pluto also rules over sex, so when you are visiting a Pluto line, expect to feel either really sexy yourself and magnetic, or to meet a bunch of really sexy people. And that being said, when it comes to health as well, Pluto, of course, would rule over any kind of sexually transmitted disease or anything that is considered to be shameful or should be hidden, or anything that might make you feel isolated, basically. Pluto is a very powerful line. When you think about it, Pluto is the smallest / dwarf planet in the sky, and it is the furthest away from us, yet I would argue that it probably has the most impact and is the most powerful of any planet in the solar system as far as its effects on us, even though it's so far away. And of course, it does rule power itself, Pluto. So that being said, even if you don't live directly on your Pluto line or even that close to it, you're going to feel its effects pretty strongly, I would suggest, either way, because it is a very powerful line. I mean, it's transformation, rebirth, and redeath, so that's intense stuff to be dealing with. I didn't grow up that close to my Pluto line, like I was saying. Like, it was going through the province of Ontario very much so intensely, and whenever I return to Ontario, I feel it, like, even when I'm pretty far away from it. And I can vouch that, you know, you grow up somewhere and you assume, you're like, oh, like, this is just how it is. Like, this is like the energy or like things that I experience, you know, that must be the same everywhere. But you go somewhere else, and like, I remember when I left Ontario, I was like, whoa, everything is so much lighter. Like, my body feels lighter. The skies are bluer and less gray looking. And yeah, anyways, like, visiting that line in other places, I can vouch that that is definitely the Pluto energy, and it is so strong that you can feel it if you're not that close to it. So whenever I return back to Toronto after being somewhere else far away from the Pluto line, far away from Ontario, Canada, I feel like I instantly start to, once I get near that line, my body feels heavier. Like, I just feel more dense. I feel like the world around me when I go back to Toronto kind of loses color as well. It's like, obviously there is color, but it's not as vivid or bright, and the skies to me are always gray in Toronto. Even when it's a sunny day, there's always this darkness to them. They're almost like a darker shade of blue compared to other places. The sun feels less strong there, and I've been other places in Canada, so there's something going on there. I don't know, that's just my experience, obviously. But I also find the people in Toronto to be very intense, deep people. There's something kind of gothic about Pluto lines. There's something kind of gothic about the people in Toronto. There's a lot of like heavy, intense makeup, dark lipstick, intense colors, a lot of black as well. I mean, I think that's partially just like a cold country thing to wear a lot of black, because black absorbs light. But I remember when I went to visit some relatives in Brazil like 5 years ago, they were like, how come you never wear any color? Why do you wear black all the time? Because people wear tons of color there, and I think that tends to be the case when you go to somewhere warmer and like more tropical. Like when I was in Australia, people wore just tons of color and no one wore black. So yeah, anyways, I kind of associate that with being a Pluto thing as well. When I go back to Toronto, I tend to feel kind of detached and isolated and kind of in my own head. And it's strange because I grew up there. It should be a place that I call home, right? It's familiar, but I've never really seen it as home in terms of the experience I've had there. Yeah, I tend to feel a little bit more down, also a little bit more creative, but really kind of in my headspace. I mean, I think it's partially like being in Canada. I feel like really trapped in cabin fever there, especially in the winter time. So as far as visiting my descending astro-locational Pluto line directly, this happened about 2.5 years ago when I went to visit my cousin who lives in New Orleans, Louisiana. So basically I went down there before knowing anything about astro-locational astrology. I only actually learned about this in the last year. So a lot of these places that I visited, I had no idea about any of the locational stuff until I came to Halifax, Nova Scotia this year on my Uranus line. I just kind of visited these places because something was calling me there. So anyways, when I went to New Orleans, there was that same darkness there, that same kind of like intensity of the people, huge drinking community, of course, because a lot of the revenue from the city comes from the drinking tourism there. There's also kind of this, I don't know, there are all these stores with voodoo kind of stuff and metaphysical kind of stuff, so that's another Pluto thing as well. Yeah, there's definitely an intensity to the people. It seemed like they had kind of dramatic lives, but I guess in Toronto it was kind of the same thing anyways. So I remember visiting, I was like in town, and there was like a real estate place, and there were a couple houses that were being advertised there, and one of them said not haunted. And I remember I took a picture of that sign because I was like, that's so weird, like that's really random, but that's like such a Pluto thing, right there. New Orleans was full of garbage and cracks and weaves in the middle of the street. And this is obviously, like, it's really sad. It's because I visited there sometime after Hurricane Katrina took place, and basically not a lot had been cleaned up there at all. Like, there were still lots of houses that were just like buildings in rubble and just broken down things that were falling apart. Obviously there's a lot of poverty in New Orleans as well, which is really sad. I think it's the poorest state, or one of the poorest states with the lowest minimum wage. So that's the Pluto thing, poverty. Also, I couldn't drink the water in New Orleans because after Hurricane Katrina, it was apparently toxic. So we had to drink only filtered water there. That's something that's ruled by Pluto. So toxicity, garbage. So when I directly crossed that Pluto line, which was just a little bit outside of New Orleans, somewhere in Alabama on the highway, there was this horrible, really scary downpour of rainstorm. And I was driving with my cousin, and she was kind of new to driving at the time, and I was like, are you sure you know what you're doing? And I was like, can you even drive here? She's like, yeah, I got a Canadian license. I mean, I think I can. So it was all just very like, whoa, you know. She's like, yeah, I'm kind of new to it, but you know, we'll get there. We'll get to Florida, right? Because we were driving to Pensacola to go to the beach, and it was the scariest car experience I've ever had. We couldn't see shit. The windows were just covered in a downpour of rain. It was like drenched the car, and we were still moving quite quickly, and I thought we were gonna die, man. It really kind of made me consider my life's value in that moment, and I wasn't sure if I was gonna make it. So that's a very Pluto thing, like dangerous things that happen to people. I've definitely heard of experiences like that where people have a lot of near-death experiences, or like totaling of their car, or deaths of other people on Pluto lines. So when we finally got to Pensacola, Florida, there was like more storming and intensity. We stayed in the tent that night, and it just rained the entire time. Not really a Pluto thing, it's cool. But I also, yeah, it was really gray there. There was kind of a heavy energy, like really heavy energy. Even though we were by the beach, I usually feel like revitalized when I'm by the ocean kind of thing, but not this time at all. So the sky was super gray that day that we were there. And we both fell asleep because we were so tired, and it didn't look sunny, but I literally woke up with the worst sunburn of my life. And I've been in strong sun before. I mean, I've been to Sydney, Australia, like I've been around Australia, and the sun there, like the ozone layer is thin. I never had a burn like that. I barely burned there. But anyways, in Pensacola, I was just beet red, like a tomato, you know? And so, I don't know, like I remember like my skin was peeling, and I just felt disgusting, and it hurt so much. But like, you know, like also when it comes to Pluto, like Pluto rules, like, I don't know, Pluto's like kind of snake-like. It rules the shedding of skin. So I don't know, maybe the sunburns could kind of be thrown in there. But yeah, and on a sadder note, when we were driving back, once again, you know, we crossed that Pluto line, and we finally get back to New Orleans, and I hadn't had service on my phone for a while, and so I was back in a Wi-Fi zone. I was checking my messages, and I get this random Facebook message, or I'm like invited to a Facebook group. It's a memorial group for a friend of mine, a childhood friend of mine, who had suddenly died. Nobody saw it coming, and so that was a real shock to come back to, and it kind of makes me a little bit scared to visit my Pluto line again, or at least my descending one. I'm like, I hope somebody else doesn't die. So yeah. So back when we were in Pensacola though, or somewhere near there, we were in this national park, and there's this fort called Fort Pickens, and we were just kind of walking around there, and it was super creepy. There was just the darkest vibe I've ever experienced. I know that people talk about really dark vibes when they go and visit Holocaust locations, but that's, I mean, I've never been to one personally, but that's the kind of vibe that I would picture being there. Like, it felt haunted, like something died there. It was the worst feeling ever, but there was nothing there. It was just like remnants of time and a historical site, but definitely a Pluto line thing, 100% there. So when I visited my Pluto IC line, or very near there, in Barcelona, Spain, and also kind of around Italy and that area in general, same darkness as in Toronto. This just vibe that I don't like very much, that I associate with Toronto now. The Pluto vibe. There's a darkness, an intensity to everybody. There are a lot of really sexy people. I felt sexier. Lots of drinking culture, city that never sleeps once again, just like Toronto and New Orleans. New Orleans isn't even that big, and it's got a city that never sleeps vibe. There was a real rock and rollin' kind of vibe in Barcelona. I remember when I got off the plane, I took a bus from the airport, and they play music in the buses there. They don't do that in Toronto, which is shitty. But I really like music. I like classic rock personally, and the bus driver was just like listening to this really intense classic rock, and I was kind of vibing to that. But everyone was just really intense in Barcelona, and yeah, people approached me who were kind of a little bit scary, like lots of panhandlers and stuff. But that happened in New Orleans as well. I didn't feel particularly safe there. I was only in Barcelona really briefly for a couple days, and so the one bar that I ended up going to the night I was there was a rock bar. Once again, it was just full of really intense people, and the bartender was like really intense, and he like passed me a note, and he'd like I find you really attractive kind of thing or something. I was like, whoa. But yeah, so that happened there. But this was my Pluto IC line. Let's keep that in mind. So the place that I was staying at an Airbnb. It was just kind of a room in another place. And I don't know, it was a really weird dynamic. The guy was really nice, and I know he lived with his sister. I don't think I ever met her, but it was just really dark and quiet. And I'd walk in and he'd be like chilling in the dark. And also, I guess they were doing it for money, and I totally respect that. But like he and his sister had to share a room, which was kind of odd too. Made me feel kind of weird, because I had my own separate room, of course, but they had bunk beds in their room. So that's a very Pluto IC thing, I'd say. Joint resources, having to share close quarters with another person. Yeah. When I was in Barcelona, I also went to this, it was like an artist type fair or something, and somewhere in the older part of Barcelona. I honestly don't really remember where it was, but yeah, it was full of crystal type stuff and really artistic people who kind of had this dark Pluto kind of vibe to them, and metaphysical stuff, and so that was neat, and that was very Pluto. Honestly, I didn't like Barcelona that much. Like, I know people talk a lot about it, and I think it's because it's on my Pluto line that I didn't like it, but I just found it really, yeah, it's not somewhere I would probably go back to. It was just like a weird experience. I'm like, okay, kind of glad I went, but kind of like, meh, whatever. So, yeah. Anyways, that's my Pluto video right there, guys. I hope that you guys enjoyed. I'll probably make another video about Pluto on the different lines as far as the IC, the MC, the descendant, the ascending Pluto line. But anyways, thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you guys in my next video. Have a good one.